When you are sailing the seas, exploring the world, and maybe taking the wonderful history and culture that surrounds us all, it is easy to miss that some of these wonders are just the other side of the bar from us. My name is James Martin, and I like whiskey. In fact, I like whiskey so much that I spent nearly 2 years hosting and producing the Malted Muse podcast. This was a weekly podcast that explored the world of whiskey, how it is made, who makes it, the current news and its long history. For me, whiskey is not just a drink, it is much more. When I raise a glass of whiskey, I feel a connection to all the skill and artistry that goes into it. But I also feel connected to much more than that. I feel connected to its history, its customs, the key figures who played a part in its development, and the poor, cold and hungry farmers who made it illegally and it for which kept them going through the long, hard winters. There is a connection with the troubled times and rebellion, as well as the joyous times and celebration. Each whiskey has an identity and a story to tell if you are willing to listen. When I am on a celebrity ship, there is a whiskey that is on the list of my Elite Plus Captain's Club cocktails perk list. It is a whiskey that is available in many places, and because of that, it may be ignored by people who want something with a bigger price tag. This whiskey is Dewar's White Label, and it is a whiskey with a long and interesting past. This is a whiskey that was key in the development of both whiskey and the whiskey industry. It is also a whiskey with an interesting flavour profile, which deserves being aware of. Let's start at the beginning, when John Dewar was born. His parents lived in a small crofter's cottage on a small farm in Scotland. They were not rich people in any way and would have had a careful and frugal life. As John grew, he attended the local school, which he would walk to and back from every day, a journey that would have taken him miles, and in the winter he would have carried peat with him to go onto the school fire. His elder brother had set up a small joinery in his hometown of Aberfeldy, and when John was old enough, he did a short apprenticeship in joinery with him, then joined his brother's business. However, after 2 years of this, he made a big change. A distant cousin was a wine merchant in nearby Perth, and John went to work with him. This moment was the spark that was to ignite the fire. This was the moment that made the change that took a poor crofter's son and made that son the father of 2 lords. This was a time when the whiskey industry was very different. Illegal distilling was still common. Legal distilleries were at risk of becoming the target of those illegal distillers, with some being burned to the ground. The whiskey itself would have been harsher and less uniform, less consistent. Some may have been adulterated, and the idea of buying it in branded bottles was just being thought about. It was a new thing that John was ready to make the most of with the opportunities that were available. John had 2 sons, John Alexander and Thomas Robert, Tommy for short. They were both trained in the whiskey trade and had good educations. It was these 2 brothers that were to take the company to the next level. The business had gained a reputation in its home area, but now it was the time to expand. This is where Tommy excelled. Despite arriving in London only to find 2 of his contacts had either gone bankrupt or had died, he struggled on. He entered the Brewers' Show, bringing with him a bagpiper. The result was a lot of angry people, but also a lot of much needed publicity. Tommy became known for his large advert on the side of the shot tower, a large and very noticeable building. This was lit by electric bulbs, and that gave the impression of a moving figure of an enormous Highlander pouring and drinking a glass of Dewar's. It was to become a famous London landmark. Tommy was not content with London. He had his eyes set on the world. His travelling was epic, and in 1904 he even had the memoirs of his world tour from the 1890s published with the name A Ramble Round the Globe. Tommy actually did 2 world tours. He had many adventures and managed to promote Dewar's whiskey on an international stage. In fact, he was so successful that even while travelling through a part of Canada that was suffering prohibition, he had a notable event. Although not a big drinker himself, he would ask for it to raise demand. On this occasion, he was told that he could not be sold whiskey due to the prohibition. The man then made the suggestion that Tommy wasn't looking very well and should try some of their cholera mixture. In holding the bottle, he saw the label that said cholera mixture on one side, and then on the other side it was a label of a whiskey, to use Tommy's words, that were well known to him, but his modesty prevents him from naming it. It was Tommy who introduced the first highball to America, and whose whiskey was popular with not 1 but 2 American presidents. But as he travelled the world, and as his brother was holding the fort and developing the business back at home, who was making the whiskey? In 1898, Dewar built its own distillery near the parents' old crofters' cottage. This is still in operation, Aberfeldy, and its 12-year-old single malt presentation can often be found behind some of the bars of airport lounges. But single malts are not so easy to make. They are done in batch production, which limits how much they can be made at one time. They can have strong characters that are not to everyone's taste, and they are expensive. However, the introduction of the coffee still meant that a quick and continuous process of distilling grain whiskey changed everything. By mixing grain whiskies and malt whiskies with great skill, it was possible to produce a whiskey that could be targeted to the flavour profile most desired. Blends often get looked down upon, but that is a shame. They can be very high quality and are the result of incredibly capable, intelligent and skillful people. Dewars did not invent blending, but they did employ Alexander John Cameron. A lot of whiskey being made at that time was getting blended in a haphazard and sometimes distasteful way. Cameron, however, was a different breed. Dewars employed him as master blender in 1890, and he set to some pioneering work. He realised that individual whiskies had their own little quirks, bonuses and shortcomings. He experimented, nosed and tasted, then experimented even more. He realised that some specific whiskies mixed better with other specific whiskies, while some were disastrous. However, what he also did was a landmark in whiskey's history. Whiskey is made, then aged in oak casks. Mix these different whiskies together and you have a blend. Cameron realised that this process could be improved on by an act of double maturation. In short, he had worked out which were the best whiskies to blend together. Then, having got them all together and left them for a while to marry, rather than putting them then into bottles, he put them back into casks for a second maturation. The result was a far superior and balanced whiskey that had the extra care of Cameron shining through it. White label has become a term for a product that is purchased from one company and then relabeled and sold as a different company. This is not the case here. Dewar's white label was so called because they simply stuck to the colour they had first used, and because a white label at that time was seen as being a sign of a premium product, they stuck with it. It is a product that was being shipped across Lake Huron, Canada, on the SS Regina in 1913. This was the year of the Great Storm that damaged many ships and sank 8, one of which was the Regina. In 1986, the ship was eventually found, and the whiskey in it was still good, although well chilled. Tommy and his brother both became lords. They are also identified by Whisky magazine as being 2 of the top 100 influential people in whisky, as is A.J. Cameron. Just 108 years later, Dewar's appointed Stephanie McLeod, who became their first female Master Blender in 2006, and has won the award of Master Blender of the Year for, I believe, 6 years in a row. And Tommy's legacy is not just in whisky. His wit and wisdom also left us with some words worth listening to, such as, the only thing you get in a hurry is trouble. So as you travel and you look at the drinks menu or the bottles on display, why not choose a Dewar's white label and give it a try? Take a look at it as you hold it in your hand and remember its long history. Think about the people behind it, the amount of craft, skill, science and time that went into it. Remember that this company, this whisky, helped change the whisky industry and has been going strong for over 125 years. As you smell it, taste it, enjoy it, do so in the knowledge that the whisky you have is the result of over 40 individual whiskies that have been carefully matched together, mixed in a specific combination, and then matured for a second time in chosen oak casks, all by a leader in the field.